Hello YouTube, Poopslag here, and this is TurboFat, an open source puzzle game I'm developing using the Godot engine, and you can find a link to the source code at the GitHub page in the description below. And this month my work has been centered around creation of a creature editor where you can edit the appearance of these little monsters now to, for example, change their color or give them a little devil tail like that guy, or maybe a cuter little kitty cat tail or a big crazy afro. That's something. Okay, so let me show you what I've been up to. So for the creature editor, I wanted to do something like The Sims, where you have the main creature in the middle and a bunch of variations around it, and you keep selecting variations until you have your final guy. But I also wanted the ability to lock down a feature if you want to keep the eyes the same, or if you definitely want to change the eyes. So both those things could be done. I drew up these two proof of concepts, and people gave me feedback on them, which was to make sure that you draw attention to the middle guy, so they know it's the main guy and variations, and not just 7 random guys, and also to make sure I cycle through all the options before I start reusing them. So it's not purely random like rolling dice, it's more like drawing cards from a deck. But I took those suggestions and started coding. Okay, so here's the mutate screen, and you can see you have the center character Calvadori, and then 6 other characters around them which you can click to bring them to the center. And then each time you click reroll, it gives you a new set of variations, but also decreases this mutagen value. And that affects how different the outer characters are, so they become more and more similar to the middle guy each time you click, and you can also change that. In addition to that, you can also lock and unlock features, so you might decide you don't like these eyes. You want new eyes, so I will unlock that. But you do like the name. Matherin, that is a boss name, so I'm going to lock the name down. And now when I click reroll, they'll all be named Matherin, but they'll all show me different eyes that I can choose from. So let's dig into the code, show you how I did all that. So a creature's appearance is defined by their DNA, which is a big dictionary of attributes. And each attribute in this DNA dictionary is called an allele. And there's 2 categories of those. The first is an enum, where it just says use cheek number 1 or use ear number 3, and those are mutated one way. And then the other is these color alleles, which say use horn RGB value of this, and those are mutated differently. So the mutation algorithm is a 2-step process. The first step involves deciding which alleles to mutate, and the second step involves mutating them. So to pick which alleles get mutated, we always mutate all of the unlocked alleles, and then we take the remaining alleles that are not locked, and we just pick a random set based on the current mutagen value. And that's how it gets the list of alleles to mutate. So after it comes up with that list of alleles to mutate, it goes through this loop and mutates each one. Most of the attributes are mutated this way, by picking an item from a list, but the RGB attributes are mutated by picking colors from a set of predefined palettes. The fatness attribute is mutated by picking a random number, and the name attribute is mutated with a Markov chain algorithm, which I will go into later. So if you want a more granular level of control when you're editing your creature, I did add this tweak tab where you can pick a specific color for your guy, for example, or if you like one specific kind of ear, you can pick that ear that you like the most. But I knew not everybody would like drop downs and color pickers for this stuff, so I added these DNA buttons where you might decide I want a new mouth, but I don't know what mouth, just show me a lot of mouths, and that just shows you a lot of random mouths on the side, and you can pick the mouth you like. And then for colors, the randomization works a little differently, where you can randomize colors 3 different ways. This rainbow DNA button says, I want to change all the colors to something, just a random RGB value, and just rolls the dice and random and ugly usually. But the middle one says, pick a color palette from a set of predefined color palettes. There's about 50, so you might like this little pumpkin color scheme. And then this third button, the black one, is just give me some variations on my current colors. Maybe I want a slightly reddish orange, so show me some options for that. Oh, that looks good. And then you can click a variation you like. When you're happy with how your creature looks, you can export it, and it'll be saved as a file that you can share with other people, a JSON file. They can import it and then move your creature. So the random creature names are generated with the Markov chain algorithm. And if you're new to Markov chains, the way they work is they analyze a bunch of input data to figure out letters which are clustered together frequently, and then they generate output data, keeping those same letter clusters intact. So for example, it might see the words pig, tiger, and George in the input data, and spit out the word PyGeorge, using the pig from pig, the eig from tiger, and the George from George. The most important variables of a Markov chain algorithm are the kinds of sample data you use and the size of the clusters. I found that a cluster size of 2 was slightly too chaotic, but a cluster size of 3 was slightly too predictable. So I created a Markov chain implementation which used fractional values like 2.7, where 2.7 would usually use a cluster size of 3, but sometimes drop down to 2. And yeah, I'm really happy with the results. So after letting the player edit their appearance in the creature editor, it seems silly that their creature wasn't visible anywhere in the puzzles. In the long term, I had a bigger vision for having the character be animated and fry up food and stuff, but in the short term, they at least needed to be visible. But this introduced a design hurdle. You see, I wanted the chef and the customers to occupy the same physical space, so they were all in the same scene, but that scene was just a child of the puzzle scene, scaled and moved and clipped so that the correct part would be visible. But if I wanted the chef to be visible too, I need to somehow have two instances of the same scene in the scene tree, and you can't really do that. So I had to redesign the scenes a little bit to where there's now a restaurant viewport which contains the restaurant scene, and this viewport is shared between all the different bubbles. And then there's two different viewport textures which display that same scene, and each viewport texture has its own camera, so they can be zoomed and panned independently. This also carried a second benefit to where it was now easier to zoom cameras in and out. Before I was having to adjust the position and size, and they were sort of dependent on each other. So something simple like keeping a camera focused on a point while it zoomed in was pretty difficult. So now as creatures get fatter, the camera zooms out so you can still see most of them. I still keep them clipped on purpose to give you that sense of scale. I also added a lot of new creature parts to increase the variety in the creature's appearance. Creatures can now have different colored faces, a few different hairstyles, handkerchiefs or scruff around their neck, or a few different kinds of tails. I was hoping to get to wings but ran out of time. Hopefully I'll come back to that soon. I also knew I didn't want all the characters to be shaped the exact same, so as a proof of concept, this month I added squirrel bodies, but I'm hoping to add more soon. Squirrels are tall and skinny, and when they gain weight, they just fatten up horizontally until they become sort of a sphere, and then they grow taller. This introduced a lot of complications though, because the arm, leg, and head positions, and the shapes of the shadow and the curves defining their body, all these things were defined in the creature scene, and they never changed, so they were all just child nodes. But now that they had to change, I needed to come up with a way to load them dynamically. So when the creature's DNA is loaded, it now removes all of those animation players, like the mouth player, ear player, and the animation player used as they gain weight. So it removes all those nodes and loads a new set of animation players based on the creature's DNA. And that's all done at runtime, and those scenes are instanced from their own scene files. So for example, since I have 3 different mouths, there's 3 different mouth player scenes. Here's the first kind of mouth, which is a beaky mouth, and its ambient animation opens and closes the mouth every 4 seconds. The second kind of mouth is the tentacle mouth, and it's just constantly moving. And the third kind of mouth I call an imp mouth, and it just wiggles slightly. So all these animations are defined in their own scene and then loaded at runtime. So I also noticed these dark lines on the back of my creature's necks, and there were some other similar visual artifacts, all related to this RGB shader I wrote. All my image files use stark shades of red, green, and blue, which are then replaced using a shader, but the naive algorithm I was using mixed in red first, and then green, and then blue, which meant that with any pixels that had multiple RGB components, the blue would wipe out the earlier values. The shader had a second problem where any pixels with an alpha component would be rendered darker, because if you sample a 25% opaque pixel in a shader, it doesn't tell you the red value is 100%, it tells you the red value is 25%. So after fixing that, the problem went away. It was a really trivial detail, but it ended up being really easy to fix. So why not? Once again, Pete Ellison of Disco Warp Records contributed 2 new tracks this month. We're looking to add a little more variety to the puzzle music, so this month we got 1 new house track and 1 new breakbeat track. Pretty awesome stuff, and I love the variety. I also noticed puzzles took about 2 seconds to launch, and while this wasn't the end of the world, I figured if I could make them launch a little faster, it would improve the player experience. We were already caching sound and image files on startup in this resource cache class. The first thing I experimented with was expanding this to include scene files. And this did make a pretty big difference, speeding things up from about 2 seconds to about 1 second. I also tried caching the node itself, like the scene which gets loaded, and that was blazingly fast, like blink of an eye. You would just start a puzzle and it was instant, but it did introduce some bugs I'll have to work around. But I think if you gave me a few days, I could do it. So it's definitely something I'll come back to. So GD Quest had a really phenomenal tutorial on their Gumroad page about creating life bars which weren't intermixed with the parts of your scene tree containing your player and the monsters, but were instead in a separate UI part of the scene tree. I adapted the techniques from that tutorial when I was creating the name tags in the creature editor. So rather than having 7 name tag objects at specific positions, the creature editor has this one name tags node, which looks for all of the nodes in the scene which are in the creature's group and creates a hookable name tag instance, which uses a remote transform 2D to reposition the name tag in the scene. The remote transform Transform 2D as a part of Creature, and all it does is relay the position to the UI layer. I ended up going back and using the same technique for the chat icons which appear on the overworld. So that's where we're at as of September. We got the creatures looking more interesting and diverse, and we got that creature editor in place. Next month I'd like to start making the levels feel more fleshed out, to where they'll each have their own little intros and own little rules, little special variations, and where you can tell which ones you've cleared, which ones you haven't. It might mean getting rid of the overworld, I'm not sure yet, but we'll see. That's where I want to be next month. Hope to see you guys then.